Board of Selectmen.
Doug Brown, Board of Selectmen.
Sam Patterson, Board of Selectmen.
Julian Sousa, Town Manager.
Steve Layton, Water Quality Committee.
Tom Duncan, Water Quality Committee.
Paul Dwyer, Planning Board.
I'm Tom Bott, I'm the town designer here in Thomas, Mass.
Jim Fox, Planning Board.
Carol Harris, Planning Board, and I'd like to say that Jim Marshall is here from the Route 28 Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Jim.
Pat Kirkwood, Planning Board. Pam Harding-Garrett, Planning Board.
Christopher Lamb, EDIT.
Noreen Stockman, Zoning Administrator.
Robert Dugan, Zoning Board.
TJ Hurry, Zoning Board.
Jerry Buchanan, Zoning Board.
Mary Schumacher, Conservation Commission. We do not have a quorum as of this moment.
Courtney Bird, Conservation Commission.
Thank you. And Sue Lorraine, Chair of the Board of Selectmen. I also want to let folks know that we have a number of other board members and town staff in the audience, and certainly appreciate that. So on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I will open our session. Jim, do you want to open yours?
Oh, yes. I'll call the Planning Board meeting to order.
And then you're going to start with Tom Bott.
Tom, take it away.
Yes, Davis Strait's reset in form-based code. Davis Strait's redevelopment has been worked on by town staff, planning board, and Cape Cod Commission, starting with the Spring Bars Road planning study in 2013. Proposing to redevelop nearly 80 acres, consisting of 468,355 square feet of various buildings composed largely of what many would consider a waning business sector, is a big lift. Developing zoning that you'd like to see used requires involving many stakeholders, including property owners. It is a big lift. Much of that lifting has been done through the work of Falmouth and the Cape Cod Commission. And like the 2013 Spring Bar study, the next step in developing the zoning builds on the current Cape Cod Commission grant-funded project, Community Resilience by Design, which is essentially creating a form-based code framework. That project concludes in March 2019, and we look to build on that by developing an RFP and requesting funding in November of 2019 to bring the Davis Strait's zoning to town meeting a year after that. That would mark the first significant funding request by the town to that end. That year would be spent working with selected consultants, property owners, planning board, and the community to create a mixed-use development of shops, offices, restaurants, and a mix of housing, including affordable housing. A place where people can live and work in close proximity to each other without having to drive a car for everything that you need. We won't be reinventing the wheel. We will be using other successful models to create an expanded tax base with densities that make a mix of housing units and public transportation a more viable option for Falmouth. And with that, I'll turn it over to the chairman of this presentation.
Very much appreciate it.
Thank you. This is a test for me. We've actually tried to use sound in this presentation the first time, so hopefully it all goes well.
Falmouth first adopted Euclidean zoning in 1925, being one of the first towns in the Commonwealth to do so. Named after a famous Supreme Court case, Town of Euclid v. Ambler Realty. The basis of use zoning was to separate noxious uses from residential settings. The segregation of uses has also led to isolated zones for commercial, residential, and institutional areas, which are only linked by auto and thus failing to create walkable, pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods. While conventional zoning closely regulates a variety of aspects related to use, parking, buffers, etc., it does not regulate the aspects that help in enhancing the character of buildings, streets, and open spaces, which together form a neighborhood. Comparing zoning types, conventional zoning specifies density use, floor area ratios, setbacks, parking requirements, and maximum building heights. Zoning design guidelines utilize conventional zoning requirements, and they specify the frequency of openings and surface articulation. Form-based code dictates that street and building types, or mix of types, build-to lines, number of floors, and percentage of built site frontage. What is form-based code? A form-based code is a land development regulation that fosters predictable built results and a high-quality public realm by using physical form, rather than separation of uses, as the organizing principle for the code. A form-based code replaces all or part of the zoning ordinance of a city or town. A form-based code is a regulation, not a mere guideline, adopted into a city or town zoning bylaw. A form-based code offers a powerful alternative to conventional zoning regulation. What does form-based code do? Instead of concentrating on land uses, meaning the use of the building primarily, plus any outdoor commercial use, this new type of code is a legal design regulation that describes the desirable physical form, placement, size, and bulk of buildings within the environment. It also addresses the size of blocks and their relationship to one another. The regulations and standards in form-based codes are presented in both words and clearly drawn diagrams and other visuals. They are keyed to a regulating plan that designates the appropriate form and scale, and therefore character, of development, rather than only distinctions in land use types. This approach contrasts with conventional zoning's focus on the micromanagement and segregation of land uses, and the control of development intensity through abstract and uncoordinated parameters, to the neglect of an integrated built form. Form-based codes are regulatory, not advisory. They are drafted to implement a community plan. Ultimately, a form-based code is a tool. The quality of development outcomes depend on the quality and objectives of the community plan the code implements. Main elements of form-based code. 1. Regulating plan. A plan or map of the regulated area designating the locations where different building form standards apply. 2. Public standards. Specifies the elements in the public realm. Sidewalk, travel lanes, on-street parking, street trees, furniture, etc. 3. Building standards. Regulations controlling the features, configurations, and functions of buildings that define and shape the public realm. 4. Administration. A clearly defined and streamlined application and project review process. 5. Definitions. A glossary to ensure the precise use of technical terms. Optional code elements. Architectural standards. Regulations controlling external architectural materials, quality, and appropriateness. Additional optional elements. Landscaping standards. Regulations controlling landscape design and plant materials on private property as they impact public spaces. Signage standards. Regulations controlling allowable signage sizes, materials, illumination, and placement. Environment resource standards. Regulations controlling issues such as stormwater drainage and infiltration, development on slopes, tree protection, solar access, etc. Annotation. Text illustrations explaining the intentions of specific code provisions. Visualizing better streetscapes. The form of our towns and cities affects the quality of our lives. The facades of buildings should welcome people, not repel them. Buildings should contribute to the public realm, not hide from it. Great streets happen when road and building designs are matched. Small towns can be revitalized by building on their original form. How we regulate urban form shapes the life of communities.
get stuck at this point. We've got to advance it one notch. I haven't gotten over how to make the two different shows work together.
This slide shows the existing condition with the illustrated case study for form-based code outlined in red dotted lines. Note the Staples building with a white roof and a blue pin in the middle. In the top left-hand corner, you will see an example of the proposed regulating plan utilizing form-based code. Current zoning for B2. Max density, 6 dwelling units per acre, shown here as 20 dwelling units per acre. Max height, 2.5 stories, shown here as 2 to 3 stories, shown with reduced setbacks for multifamily. In the key on the right, you will see the different types of buildings. Mixed-use walk-ups, manor homes, double-deckers, townhouses, and duplexes, totaling 4,500 square feet retail, 52 units, and 20 dwelling units per acre. This is a rendering of what form-based code could look like. Starting with the district local technical assistance being awarded in February, the work on this project will continue to November, when we will seek funding at town meeting. Then in January 2020, public hearings will be held. Then, come town meeting in November 2020, it could be adopted into the zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Great presentation. Part of the reason that we have these joint meetings is, in terms of the landscape of the meeting, so to speak, it's really growth for Falmouth, which has an eye towards sustainability, which is important to us all, but that doesn't gild the lily, which is the best and the wonderful part of Falmouth. So from time to time, we try to get all of the boards together so that from the beginning, we get everyone's input. And I want to remark, I think this is the first time that EDIC has been here, and just in terms of forward thinking and economic development. So I think that would be some great feedback as planning kind of launches on this really major change and transformative kind of idea. Does anyone have any questions about the presentation, which I really thought was, gave me a much better idea of what
The slide illustrated a whole lot, like the Staples building around, completely being developed. Is that, how would it just, the Staples building was sold, how would that get integrated in farm-based building? It would be a single building, it wouldn't have the other interactive parts.
Well, the parcel in question, the Staples, goes all the way down to the street, including the parking, including the President's building, and the Starbucks, the little lot inside that owned by another party. So it's kind of commingled. The plan is they'll be incentivized, that they'll actually, the buildings, we're going to be having income on 3 levels. Right now, they have 1 level for rent. That's all they have. We're going to have 3 levels because we'll have ground floor for retail and 2nd and 3rd floor apartments. And the income from that greatly exceeds the income from what they have now. So the goal is to get them to sell to a developer who decides to do the whole thing, to do a bigger area. But it's done through financial incentives. It's, private property. We can't tell them what to do. We have to make it worth their while. But I've run the numbers. It's considerably more income. The problem is that I still haven't got the development costs worked out, how much it's going to cost to do that, But it's being done all over the country. This is not a really new idea. It's been around for a while, and it's really catching on.
Jim, quick question. Does incentives mean tax breaks, and how would that affect the town next up?
It might. They built a high-rise in New York City this year with all apartments, all affordable housing. And it was done with tax incentives. It In Boston, we used to have tax incentives for development too. It's really what you give is real estate tax breaks for an extended period of time, and then the developer uses that as it's a greater return for him.
So I'm guessing then that we'll implement form-based code in one section at a time?
Yes, actually, we'll do very small. We're trying to just do one little, just this, even not all of Davis Straits, just 1/4 of Davis Straits. Just a small piece of it. It's going to be a tremendous amount of work. All those buildings get designed, have hearings with other boards. It's all done up in advance. So it's really a tremendous effort by every board in town and getting involved in it. But once you get it done, the developer can look at it, say, I can do that, boom. They apply for the permit, the building's already, they do the details on the designs, but most of the character, neighborhood, environmental, parking, all those issues are all done.
Pat, and then Tom.
I want to add to what Jim has said. I think this is wonderful. We all thought this is a wonderful step forward for Falmouth, but it is not going to happen if we just do the zoning and say that this is what we want. We do have to go out and aggressively market this plan to the owners, to potential occupiers of the property. I, for years, looked at Boston to see how much they're bringing in the way of companies moving from, say, Connecticut, particularly, probably New York too, because they're making it possible for these companies, more than possible for these companies, to locate in Boston. We just can't sit here and let our community die economically. We have to aggressively market the concept. And as Jim said, he's got to run the numbers, or somebody's going to run the numbers as to why this is going to be beneficial to the owners of the property, to the occupiers of the property.
There's a local example that really is, I think, encouraging to everyone, but it was led by a developer in Mashpee. You know that Mashpee Commons is form-based zoning, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. But the developer owned all that land, so he could do what he wanted. He could call all of the shots, and he had the financing to do it. But it's been so successful there, commercially and aesthetically, for the whole town, that the town now of Mashpee is working on adopting form-based zoning. They're a little bit ahead of us. There are a lot of other communities our size that are ahead of us. They can serve as examples to us as we see what are the possibilities here for incentives, how tight to make the regulations, how to set up the administration to really facilitate it for everybody. As Jim said, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're buying a set of tires, we hope, that other people have already tested.
I just want to follow up on one thing before you come. The reason why we're doing this is we were challenged 3-4 years ago when we started doing the housing studies, and they were saying, we got to do housing. And then we said, okay, where are you going to put it? Okay, and then the idea is we were also working on smart growth. Said there was a lot of things. Well, why don't we just go out in Hatchville and build a 300-unit development out there? And the smart growth people said, well, that's a problem. If you start doing that, you get schools, you have an elementary school out there, you have fire station out there, sewer lines. And smart growth was to try to redevelop where you already have your infrastructure, where your highways, your buses. So you got to make your highways work better, because they can't be a giant funnel. And so that's why we started looking at other areas. And then we took a look over at the parking lot of the plaza and said, boy, that's a great big piece of concrete or slab there. We should really try to do something with it. And we contacted the Cape Cod Commission, and they started down the road with the Davis Straits reset. But it really came out of a local comprehensive plan that we presented 5-6 years ago. And so it's taken a while, and it was presented as a 50-year plan. And that was real easy to do, because everyone said, oh, we don't have to worry about it. But last year I said to Pat, why don't we make it a next year plan? And now it's going to be, now the work is on.
And I said, if you want to create zoning that people are going to use, you have to involve the people who are the property owners, who are those stakeholders. So it's very important not to pitch this after the fact, but to involve those property owners in the process of developing the zoning. Most of the successful 40R developments that have happened in the Commonwealth have been because they've been developer-driven. In this case, we're looking at creating this process where we were working with the stakeholders, making the pitch to them taking their input and developing a process that they already have some level of buy-in to prior to creating the zoning. So it is a collaborative process that has to involve the stakeholders of the property owners of the property. Because they see that there are only so many all-night 24-hour gyms you can put into an abandoned big box. Big boxes are this waning sector of the economy that I was talking about. And we see them going away on a regular basis. So to be ahead of the curve on that and to look at the revenue that they can generate from this new type of development or this type of development versus what they've had. At some point, they have to look and say, we have to make this investment because what we've got isn't going to pay the bills anymore.
So how does that fit with, for example, about a week ago, I had a constituent come to my office and say, you know, the 300 committee was really smart years ago when they started putting land aside for open space. We should have at the same time put land aside for housing. And her point was, you know, at retirement age, when, and it's not, you know, I hear this all the time. Folks want to downsize. They want to sell their big family home to a nice young family that's going to further contribute to Falmouth, that will have jobs and opportunities here, and they want less to take care of. They would like to have something that, you know, is, you know, what is it, south, or, you know, one of those bigger developments in Mashpee where everything is right there. You've got services, maybe a store, maybe a pool, maybe a golf, I mean, some kind of development like that, and I'm wondering how this might fit to serve that group of folks in town, Charlotte.
Well, curiously, in a way, we did set land aside. We paved it. We had, you know, enormous parking requirements, and think about all that pavement all along Davis Straits. Well, you know that it's empty most of the time, and were this to go ahead, you could see in the slide that it wouldn't be empty any longer. And what a big part of this form-based zoning for that particular area is to make it multi-use, so that you're going to have commercial things below, residential housing above, of whatever kinds becomes attractive to developers. So it would be up to us to have the kinds of zoning that we would need, so it would be attractive for affordable housing, it would be attractive for all ages, it wouldn't be just for 55 and plus, as is happening in several parts of town, because there's several parts to this that we haven't touched on yet, but one big part of it is, you know, Falmouth doesn't have any multi-family housing zoning yet, is to be sure that we do have that and encourage it in that area so that we would have workforce housing, we would have housing for older people. Southport, I think you were looking
right.
for that name. I have several friends who live there. There aren't really shops. It's lovely, it's nice, very Stepford Wives, but it's, okay, but it,
Yeah, say that out loud.
it doesn't have stores, it doesn't have libraries, it's quite a trek from there to the library. If Davis Straits comes along, as we've been sort of discussing it among ourselves, it will have access to all of those things and be an attractive thing. We saw as the slides went forward, the last thing they popped in are all the trees, and suddenly you can't see the buildings. That might be off-putting to commercial establishments, you know, where'd my sign go? So a lot of things can be built into it to make it attractive.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little trickier here. Unlike areas like the South Weymouth Naval Air Station, which they have redone with overlay zoning, the whole concept of smart growth, which goes back many, many, many years, where you can have transportation, schools close by, libraries, facilities. So for people your age, Sue, who need so much more help, you know, then you get to a point you just don't need it anymore.
From now on, everyone can only speak once.
Right. Where there could be, you know, when you think of what are the needs of a community like Falmouth, well, you may want an area that's developed, again, with a commercial that may have a podiatrist, that may have a little pharmacy, a bodega of some sort. So people can live, work, and age in place. And it's you should get online and look at what they've done at South Weymouth. It's really quite remarkable, but they started with, cleaned up Superfund site. And here, it's a little trickier because it's so developed.
I'm
And
gonna
I-
cut her off, Patty. No, I'm sorry, I'll let you finish, go ahead.
She is so mean to me.
I don't know why.
But it's a little trickier when you have a very fully developed area. And then you can see a space like where Staples is, and you know that all of those big box stores they have an end in sight. So it's a little trickier, but again, the same concept of having all those facilities within walking distance, and for workforce housing, people don't need a car. And so there are a lot of pluses, but I will put in my one last plug. If we don't get fast internet here, we will never bring the young people who might want to start with their incubator businesses.
Well, that's a great segue, because that's something that EDIC is on top of. I'll Patty make her comment first.
I'd like to point out that there are some multi-use pieces of property. Not that anything's happened with them all, but there's a Spring Bars Road project that is open space and in theory housing. But getting that to happen took years. It took a lot of work with the neighbors to get the buy-in before the plan was even solid, and that's important, and that lacks, obviously, in this town. And I think people are starting to pay more attention. But then trying to get the zoning stuff, the funding, and all of that. But it has been done. We need to do more of it, and just the concept of it was really hard for the town when the CPC was pushing that. So it exists, it just shouldn't be as hard as it is.
Jerry?
Questioning like how the current and future infrastructure might have to be planned, and then maybe have a presentation later. But it just struck me on that particular parcel. Let's say it might be a better chance of more that would be increased residential. The wastewater flow needs to be increased, and we're at some type of capacity. And maybe later it's difficult to set aside an estimated flow for that and keep it there. This might be one of the better cases if there's no sewer they could put in it. And I did say that. They could put it in an advanced wastewater treatment plant. Just the future of infrastructure in its capacity and how you plan ahead for it, or even resiliency. But that's it.
Well, that would be a good segue, but Mary first.
Thank you. We do have a forum president at this point, so we'll call to order the Conservation Commission. I know there was mention in here of environmental considerations, but, just from a procedural standpoint, there would be permitting, and to enforce at least the state wetlands regulations, as we do under local comprehensive permit for 40B developments. Now, those developers, in our experience, are very familiar with the basic, the detailed requirements of the state Wetlands Protection Act, and some of them become familiar with the FALMA standards. And depending on whether the local standards would apply in a case like this, or it may not be the case that they would come in. I don't know how well versed they would be in this, but I think it would be a good idea to think about that, and perhaps for the town to understand what the envelope is going to be for the development before or at the RFP stage, at least, so that they can signal that that should be recognized in bids. And if the local standards are going to apply, even if it's only state, and if it's a very big development, there could be the outer perimeter of the development, but then envelopes within that space, depending on what wetland resources the space contains. So Just saying, I think it would be a good idea to have that recognized and somehow accounted for in the earlier planning stage.
That's the thing, it does. It's done in advance. We'll be coming to you to have the codes that you want in that area regarding the conservation areas and the standards. And it's all going to be done, 90% of the work will be done in advance. You won't be having as many hearings because this area will be identified exactly what they have to do. And so they'll just be like almost administrative reviews because you should have already had all the input of all the things you wanted on any of the areas that were done. So there's a special form-based conservation code, and you label it to the areas you need to protect it, and you folks can come and help write it with us.
Okay, so we have the option of applying the local standards?
Absolutely.
This is not a 40B.
No, I understand that.
No, yes, you may negotiate on some of them, but yes, absolutely, the standards are applied. And this was first checked, I don't believe we're in a resource area, but we are, and as soon as we start moving this around, we make this a little bit bigger, and it starts to hit in resource areas. So you would have to have all those standards already done in advance, so it's a lot of upfront work instead of hearings.
So Doug next, and I just want to say that the concept generally, I just want to echo for the town and staff to have a process that lets developers know early what's needed, in other words, the process of, almost checking the box is incredibly important because it saves money, it saves false starts, and it lets the community know in terms of expectations what's going to happen. So I think that certainly is would attract developers. We want to be sure we do maintain Falmouth's essence in terms of the type of development we want. Doug?
Another important part of the overall study was that some of this area is, what was a wetland, and like the Falmouth Inn across from Dairy Queen there, and the future plan for that may be not to redevelop it. It'd be unfortunate for the property owner, and they may try to hang on as long as possible. It won't be like an incentive like the Stables parcel would be, but it's like a negative incentive, letting them know that at some point this is not going to be redevelopable, and so those would be the areas where you would, part of the planning process where your jurisdiction would come into play, and we delineate where that would terminate.
The Davis Straits plan shows that area as being a park, and actually bringing there used to be a river that ran all the way up to the Morse Pond and connected to the harbor. And because of it's very deep in the floodplain, and to be resilient, you need to have areas that can absorb the flood. It's designed, if you look at the Davis Straits, that area is all walkways, green walkways, trees, and we have a new vision of the town with like 2 town greens on either end of Main Street, one old one and one newer one with the development around it again. So that intersection of Main Street, Davis Straits, and Falmouth Heights Road is almost like the other end of the village. It's like it's being developed with green areas around it, living areas, walkways, stores, kind of like we have downtown. That's what makes downtown so pleasant. Downtown Falmouth is an unbelievable place to even rent apartments. I've got a couple buildings I rent there. You can't believe the rents, the market rents we get. $2,000, $1,500 for a 1-bedroom. People absolutely love living near the stores. Even I have some tenants that came up from Florida. They had sold their house. They wanted to have a place back up here because their kids, their grandchildren here. They rent an apartment from me. They pay $1,500. It's a beautiful 1-bedroom above the 8 Cousins bookstore, and they just love living downtown. I rent them as fast as I put them on the market. There's a tremendous demand for downtown living.
And one more incentive that we may offer would be the transfer development rights in those areas, and perhaps that would accompany tax breaks for them to relocate that motel or other things that are in that greenway.
Good idea. I want to make sure we bring in wastewater considerations at this point. The next item on the agenda, which will kind of just keep flowing, so to speak, this conversation. Wastewater planning update. Sue, please.
Hi.
Oh, there you are.
Do you mind if I come sit at the table while I'm
I really hope you will. Thank you.
I'm not trying to pretend I'm a board member.
No. It's better, I think, for the camera for folks at home.
Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
I'm Amy Lowell. I'm the town's wastewater superintendent, and I'm going to speak about wastewater system capacity, and then I'll turn it over to Eric Turkington, the chair of the Water Quality Management Committee, to talk about the status of the planning process. So I spoke at a meeting a year ago at the joint meeting, and the circumstances haven't changed tremendously since that meeting. More properties within the Little Pond Sewer Service Area have connected, but that is still not 100% complete. The final deadline is April, the end of April of this year. And over the past year, the Board of Selectmen has held a number of hearings and granted variances under the flow neutral bylaw for a number of redevelopment and redevelopment projects. The town's wastewater system capacity is limited primarily by the groundwater discharge permit for the plant. We have a very stringent discharge permit there, and however, I should mention we also do have some limitations within our collection and transmission system, meaning within the pipes and the lift stations that convey the wastewater, particularly in the downtown area. So I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. The average flow to the wastewater plant in 2018 was 450,000 gallons a year, which is 63% of the permitted average annual flow. So we are not at a critical point at this point. However, I do.
Amy, you said a year, I think, at the beginning of the day, 450,000 gallons.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I was incorrect. 450,000 gallons per day was the average flow last year. And the permitted flow is 710,000 gallons per day. So we were at 63% on average last year. The permit does require, our permit, like I believe any groundwater discharge permit, requires that when you reach 80% of your permitted average annual flow, you provide the state with a plan for how you're going to stay within the permit limits. So I've spent some time looking at the projected flows from our existing service area, as well as the additional projects that have been proposed and are well along in the permitting process in town. And based on that, I estimate that the town would reach 80% by 2021, so in the next 3 years. And that is really based on full flow from the Little Pond Sewer Service Area with everything connected, and construction and operation of the projects, the significant projects that are already well along the way in the permitting process. The Water Quality Management Committee is spearheading a next phase of wastewater management planning for the town. They're working with the Department of Public Works and an engineering consultant to evaluate expanding the wastewater service area. But that process will also, that planning process does also include accommodation of additional flow within our existing service area. We've gotten the message that the town doesn't want wastewater capacity to be the limiting factor in, for example, the Davis Straits growth plan or Davis Straits redevelopment plan. So we are planning to accommodate in that plan 20% wastewater flow increase within the existing sewer service areas. The main limitation to accommodating any additional flow, any significant increase in flow, is where the town puts that treated wastewater. So our main limitation is the permit. And in order to get the permitted discharge increase, we need to find another site. The town needs to locate another site for treated wastewater discharge. So I'm going to let Eric talk more about that, but that's the main obstacle, the main challenge of expanding the town's wastewater system capacity is citing that recharge. There are some collection and transmission system limitations, particularly in the downtown area. And we looked at this in the last planning phase and decided we weren't at the point where we needed to modify that system. But we will be watching where this heads, and we're going to need to be looking at when we will need to do some work in the downtown area just on the piping system. We did evaluate that in the last planning process and looked, for example, at taking the flow from our spring bars, our new spring bars lift station, directly to our Shiverts lift station, which is behind Eastman's on Main Street. And that would take flow out beyond the Main Street, Davis Streets area and avoid the limitations within that area. But that's a significant infrastructure commitment that needs to be planned and designed and funded. So I'm just letting you know up front that as significant, if significant growth does happen within this area, that is something the town's going to need to contemplate. So I think I can turn it over now to Eric. Eric, that's not my job.
No, that completely is. I appreciate you really taking charge and looking forward. And I want to just emphasize again the point of these meetings. I mean, it's tough to get up. It's freezing in the middle of winter. But if the planning, Davis Straits, reset plan doesn't anticipate the water needs, and if tax credits for developers don't anticipate the additional potential tax burden of expanding water treatment capacity, then it doesn't work. So the great plans are thought about well ahead, and they include every variable. So that's what we're doing here, and I very much appreciate it. Eric?
Okay, for those of you who have not been immersed in wastewater the way we have, I'll give you a quick 5-year look back. 5 years ago, the DEP required, and the town submitted, a plan for what we were going to do for the 5 south estuaries that are all impacted by overdoses of nitrogen. And the gist of that plan was, we agreed we were going to sewer Little Pond, which we have done, and we were going to try out all the different alternatives that seemed to be feasible, with the idea that we'd come up with ways to deal with estuaries without sewering. So we have done that. We did the sewering piece, we've done the alternatives piece, and now it's 5 years into it, and we have to report back with another 5-year plan. So there's going to be 2 key pieces to this next 5-year plan. And the first one is going to be, as Amy says, discharge site. Right now, we couldn't add any sewering without having a discharge site to put this stuff. It's not terrible stuff. We're talking about 3 parts of nitrogen per milliliter, which is 1/3 of what the EPA says is safe to drink. It's not that awful stuff, but there's a lot of it. We're talking about millions of gallons. So we have to have a site that can take it and is environmentally sound. So starting next month, at our next meeting, the town's consultant is going to come forward with a half a dozen sites that they've looked at in terms of cost, in terms of environmental impact, in terms of neighborhood acceptance. And we in the whole town are going to look at these and say, what do we think is the best one to go forward with? Once we've figured out that piece, we can get to the other piece, which is how much more sewering can we do? We know some of our estuaries, we hope, we can do without sewering. One that we clearly cannot do without sewering is going to be Great Pond. And that's the target area right now. But how much sewering we can do in Great Pond, whether we can do part of it, all of it, we don't know yet, because the cost of the first piece defines the cost of the second piece. All of this won't actually be done until 2025, which is the next window of opportunity, as we call it, where the tax, or a window of funding availability comes where we can spend some serious capital money without raising the tax rate. So that's where we are. In the next 6 months, the town's going to make those 2 decisions, or at least they're going to make them as far as sending them to DEP. They're going to decide where we want to have the discharge site and how much more sewering we want to do. And that's why this conversation is really important right now.
So in terms of public outreach, do you and the committee anticipate kind of using as a blueprint all the outreach you did earlier with the, village associations and the meetings in terms of just inviting the public to get an idea of what the plans might be?
Well, we're going to start on February 7th with the consultant rolling out the half a dozen options that have been looked at. And then we'll start taking some guidance from the selectmen and from the towns as to which ones we would like to do, which ones could we afford to do. The outfall option, for example, has a lot of environmental pluses to it, but it costs $100 million. I don't think we're going to do that one.
What's an outfall?
For
For anyone who doesn't know.
For anyone who wasn't around in 1979.
That's an EPAM.
This town had a valid question and a wonderful argument at great length over whether or not putting treated effluent out into the water bodies, the Vineyard Sound or Pleasant Bay would be a good idea. 40 years later, it's still on the table. Many things have changed, but the price tag kind of takes it off the table. But there are half a dozen options that we'll get into in great detail on February 7th. Take guidance from the community, and by the end of the year, we'll report to the state, here's the discharge site we want to do, and here's how much sewering around Great Pond we want to do.
Great, Jerry?
I just wanted Amy to validate, when we're at 80% stage, that's not a sewer tie-in moratorium, that's just planning has to begin, and it sounds like we're well into it. So
Right.
I've had people say, oh no, at 80% we have to stop, so maybe those that are listening, you could confirm that, at least as of now.
As Eric said, over the next year, the town will identify a proposed recharge site and a sewer area. In addition to that, the town will plan to accommodate. At the moment, we've been talking about a 20% increase in flow from the existing sewer service area, and so that's the planning that is required. We're going to, by the end, this plan is due to the state in December of this year, so that plan will serve the role of telling the state how we plan to accommodate that additional flow. In order to actually accommodate that additional flow, some of this has to actually happen though. We have to get the recharge site, and in order to allow the kind of growth or redevelopment growth that the town is discussing.
I have a follow-up question, and this is for Eric. You've been working on approved innovative and alternative or advanced systems. In that plan that's coming out around December, will you have a target for what you would consider an advanced wastewater, advanced nutrient removal system is, 10 milligrams per liter, for all over town, or would it be case by case, watershed by watershed?
The technology that we're zoning in on, we think we can get to 10. This is of great interest to everybody in the room, I know. But
of course it is.
10 is important. 10 basically, if you can get the EP to agree that it will consistently work at 10, you can put them in the people's backyards as a supplement to their Title V system, and you can get a majority of our estuaries using that means to not need to be sewered. And that, of course, has been the key goal on here. We've got 14 estuaries. We cannot even think about sewering them all. So the alternative is showing good promise. But it won't work for a place like Great Pond, where the level of nitrogen is so overwhelming. It wouldn't work.
This is for most likely Eric, but also Amy. When you're planning ahead for a new discharge site, what kind of target are you looking at for capacity of that discharge site? You're going to have to look at what we're talking about.
That's a very good question. Each one of these half a dozen options that we're going to roll out on the 7th will come with a number of what's the capacity this site will take. And the town may look at one and say, well, this is really cheap, but it doesn't produce enough capacity to do us any good. Or, you know, that's going to be the judgment call that the town's going to have to make. We're not looking at any that aren't producing any capacity or even such a small amount, but it will vary depending on the sites.
And so I just have a timeline question. So we're looking at November of 2020 for adoption of the form-based in the Davis Straits reset. But now we're hearing that on sewer and septic, we're looking around 2025. If something did pass at town meeting in 2020 to change the zone, but now we don't have the capacity to actually implement, how does that affect applications in that area?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I thought she said we have the capacity. She's planning that 20% increase is identified for that area. That's what I thought I heard.
And that will not actually be implemented until funding is approved
Right.
and the design is, you know, the planning goes its course, the permits are in place, and the funding is approved, which we anticipate would be in 2025. So there is an implementation lag. However, what I said was I anticipate we get to 80% of our permitted capacity in the next 3 years. That doesn't mean we're at capacity. Excuse me, it means we're within 20% of it. So we do have some additional time there. And I don't expect that development would occur immediately within, you know, once the zoning is changed. You know, there is a lag on that end as well. So I can't say precisely, but there is some buffer beyond 2021 to allow the town some growth between then and when additional recharge sites.
I'd like to add that Board of Selectmen with the gatekeeper until if there's capacity there, they want to do something in accordance with flow neutral bylaw in this capacity. I think it ultimately is the Board of Selectmen that it might be a variance. I forget the word that's in the flow neutral bylaw.
Sam?
Yeah, I just have a question for Eric. I assume if we're looking at IA systems, we have to look at the watershed area that contributes to any particular body, and that has to be taken into consideration about whether we're going to allow them in a particular or require them in a particular area.
Julie, did you want to pitch in on that?
Well, I'm happy to confirm what Jerry indicated. Yeah, these under the flow neutral bylaw, as members of the board are aware, these requests for variances or waivers to allow connection for wastewater come to the Board of Selectmen and are reviewed, and the board can adjust the manner in which you evaluate each of these as capacity limitations dictate. But I'm very pleased that Amy has confirmed that once we reach 80%, all that means is that we need to have a planning process in place, which we've already talked about beginning. So there need not be a concern that we're lacking in a process to be preparing for this next step, because that has long been anticipated, as Eric and Amy have confirmed, and that is going forward. And even though we're challenged, we do have some significant options. One additional one that I just want to toss out there that hasn't been necessarily recognized widely is potentially collaborating with other Upper Cape communities and available discharge capacity at Joint Base Cape Cod. Again, there's a cost to that. It's part of a collection of options, and it certainly is something that's going to be discussed at considerable length, along with other land-based application options. As Eric's noted, the ocean outfall is compelling and appealing, but extraordinarily expensive. And many may not be aware, but at one time, the town of Falmouth did have an approved ocean outfall, and it was abandoned and we walked away from it. So, we've got to start that process over. Thankfully, the door's opened. The door used to be barred to ocean outfalls, and due to the town of Falmouth, fundamentally, that door was reopened by the legislature and working with DEP.
I'd like to issue a brief call to action, because this funding window of 2025 sounds like a crazy number. That's only 6 years from now. Only 6 years. And I think everybody here is very aware of how long it takes to get things done. So just keep
deadline.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why this meeting is so important. As Eric said, you know, we are all immersed in wastewater and we're better together. Charlotte and then Doug.
This scarcity actually creates another opportunity for incentives to things that the town wants to see happen. In allowing things to go forward, it would be very handy to have a prioritized list that would put multifamily housing and affordable housing very near the top of that list, if not the top, so that that would be an incentive to developers to come forward with the things that the town knows that it wants.
Well, that's part of the board selectmen's analysis. We have a formal prioritization list, and we should publicize that more because that's a really crucial point. After Doug, I want to kind of, and one more, I want to move this, I want to ask if there's anyone in the audience that has a point to make, and I want to introduce the next agenda item, the Main Street Route 28 roadway reconstruction, and how this might bear. Doug?
I just hope we really keep that ocean outfall on the table right for the very last minute. Because when we looked at it years ago, and I know things have changed and the reductions in nitrogen have improved, but the last time we looked at it several years ago, we were probably going to need several sites, and that's probably still the case. We'll do one site at a time, but still eventually the cost will be there. And even though the ocean outfall may be more expensive than any one site, in the long run it might be the ultimate site because we could keep all of our wastewater treatment at the same location and all of our discharge right out to the ocean there. And I think it's the long-range plan that's probably the best, so I hope we can still keep it on the table.
That's it.
I apologize for being a little late.
That's quite all right.
Several
Good
folks
things
got a
covered
different
those
time.
way.
And this might have been covered, and it'll segue into the next section. What's being done in terms of traffic planning and parking for these? If we're taking the parking away from the Staples parking, and we're adding multi-story building that's going to have living space, and you want people to go to stores, where are people going to be parking?
That's a huge question. I want to just asterisk that the Cape Cod Commission's transportation outreach is coming up. There are 3 days that are being publicized. They don't have them, but look for that because it's a regional issue as well as, as Ray Jack often says, our roads are built for far fewer people than we have right now. Our infrastructure is built for far fewer people than we have right now. So that's it. I think that's it has equal status to every other concern that we've raised here. Julian, do you want to just take a pitch at that, or maybe Peter, however you want to look at roadway capacity, traffic, parking?
Right. I don't know if you want to tie that into the Route 28 reconstruction.
Sure. Let's do that.
Which allows us to move in that direction as well. Yeah, we're well aware of the challenges that we have. In my judgment, primarily seasonal. I know we've had this debate on multiple occasions. As Sue has said, we have infrastructure designed for 30,000 people, which is our year-round population, including parking and roadways. But when we're taxed with 100,000 people for 90-plus days, everything gets pushed, everything from roadway capacity, police and fire response, ability to pick up curbside refuse and recycling. And as a reminder, we're one of only 2 communities on the Cape that make house calls for trash and recycling. And there aren't very many in the Commonwealth that do it either, with the exception of the largest cities. One community I was manager in, we did it as well, but in general, for communities of our size, you don't see the curbside pickup. So we have a number of services that gets taxed to the limit when we have an overall design for 30-some thousand people, and we're accommodating 100,000 plus, which is why we're thankful to have some ability with the future short-term lodging tax to maybe have some offsetting revenues. But I also want to note that in terms of parking in the Route 28 and the whole corridor, we are looking at reconstruction of that entire Main Street corridor. We have a a committee, Route 28 Citizens Committee. I see our Vice Chair, Jim Marshall, is with us. They've had 2 meetings. They met this past Thursday again. I was happy to attend that meeting. Public Works Director Ray Jack is our primary staff liaison. Peter McConerty has been with us regularly as well. Our Deputy Public Works Director who's here today. And they are looking at the segment of that roadway reconstruction from the school administration building east, and the segment that goes basically from Palmer Avenue to the school administration building is fundamentally in place, subject to final plans and determination through the Board of Selectmen about how they want to proceed. But when I say there is less to be done there, only because there are very few options in terms of our existing corridor. You really can't widen it. Through the downtown area, we are very limited with the on-street parking we have now. There are some creative options that can be looked at, but most of them fall in and out of fashion, in my humble opinion, as far as things like how can you deal with more off-street parking and accommodating major increases in accommodations and visitors for a short period of time. And so that's something that we continue to look at. There was at one point a discussion with a potential earmark from the legislature, which unfortunately has not developed in terms of the ultimate funding as yet, to look at off-street parking alternatives and options for things like wayfinding signs and taking maximum advantage of existing school parking in the off-season, and encouraging downtown visitors to park there. But I think, having said that, one of our major challenges remains that there is a tendency to want to schedule major special events in the town of Falmouth during this seasonal peak, for which we don't begin to have enough capacity to accommodate out-of-town visitors who are encouraged to come and attend. And I periodically get calls and emails and letters from them complaining that certain entities have encouraged these events, not necessarily the town of Falmouth directly, for which they come to attend and they have nowhere to park. And that's what ties into some of what Sue's talking about with the county, as well, including the RTA, looking at enhanced mass transportation as an alternative. One other comment, editorial comment on my part, if you'll allow me. There have been suggestions about multi-level structured parking in the downtown area, which seems like sort of an easy solution to the challenge. We have to recognize we'd be building a major parking facility that would be needed 3 months of the year, and we're paying for it 12 months of the year. And the other 9 months of the year, and I've been in a community that had this, it's an attraction for things that are very unpleasant and that create police and fire necessities and other accommodations. The same community had multi-level structured parking and tore it down because of the difficulties that it presented. And in our situation where there wouldn't, in all likelihood, be a 12-month need, we just need to be cautious about the choices we make and how we finance them with the town's limited resources. We'd always like to think that the Commonwealth or Uncle Sam would step in and provide a lot of funding for all these things that we'd like to do. But at the end of the day, most of us have come to recognize that the solution lies with all of us in this room and the taxpayers that we serve in terms of what we're able to do, a la constructing a new senior center and things that come with it. So parking is important. We need to keep it in mind, and I believe it will be accommodated for the new residents in these form-based zoning areas as a matter of course. So thanks for my long litany there.
No, not at all. I wanted to kind of turn to folks in the audience just to see if anybody has a point to make that hasn't already been made. But back to Betsy's point, the Board of Selectmen, a meeting or two ago, I put on the agenda the possibility of looking at Transportation Committee again. So we are plugging in that piece. The staff has already been looking at it, but we really want to raise the profile things, glam camping, driving onto 28, which is the major route for folks getting to school, getting to Woods Hole, getting to the vineyard. I mean, that's, I think we really have to look at how many people we can dump on our major roads so that, and again, it's about, it's about planned growth that keeps in mind, that the pleasant living that we have right now. Is there anyone in the audience who has been wanting to make a point that, Charlie, please?
I just want to bring up several things I'm aware of that are important to this discussion. The first, I'm Charles McCaffrey. I'm the town representative on the Cape Cod Commission, and I'm chair of the Town Coastal Resiliency Action Committee. I'm also a member of the Charter Review. And there's things going on there that all relate to this. First of all, to let you know that the Cape Cod Commission update of the regional policy plan has been approved after several years of work and many public hearings. The County Commission has approved it last Wednesday. That's important. That as a guide for planning that's done in the town, particularly the comprehensive plan as it is revised and updated, is a regional policy plan that will provide guidance. And to the extent the comprehensive plan matches the regional plan, and there are not any real policy distinctions, there may be benefits to the town. And the Commission is working on, I think, strengthening the incentives for getting approval of local plans that match the regional plan. So that's an important resource. And we know from what the Planning Board said how helpful the Commission was in the Davis Straits visioning. All of that's been talked about relates to planning very much. And the Charter Review Committee has, at this stage, has identified about 40 areas where there might be improvements or revisions to the town charter. One of those 40, and no decisions have been made on which ones will be recommended for consideration by town meeting, is improving planning. Currently the town charter does identify the comprehensive plan, the selectmen's strategic long-range plan, the town capital improvement plan. But there's no real indication that these should be aligned, which we're talking about here, and adhered to. And the town seems to, from all of this work, recognize the importance of planning for having a sustainable and economically significant future. So that's important, and so encourage people to follow the work of the Charter Review Commission to see that the charter does provide the right direction in a very general way to the town's planning efforts. Finally, the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee has a study going on now by the Woods Hole Group, which is taking a very sophisticated model developed by the state, mainly transportation, and has already been used in Boston for their resiliency planning, and will come up with detailed assessment of, at this stage, what town assets are at risk from flooding as a result of storms and sea level rise. And in 2030, which is not far as we know, and 2070, which is still part of the time period which we're planning for with such major things as the Davis Straits. So in June, this study will be ready, and it will have a very detailed assessment of town-owned assets that are at risk from flooding in 2030 and 2070, so that will influence our planning. We can use that information with additional work to begin to look at other assets, because just town-owned assets doesn't help us plan for the future. We need to know what general development, residential, will be at risk in that time period, those time periods. Earlier somebody mentioned about
open space acquisition and how great that's been, but we weren't looking at open space for land acquisition for future housing. And I think what Charlotte said is a good response to that. But significant areas of development will be impacted by future flooding from storms and sea level rise. And we will need to provide for relocation of some housing and development in the future, even if we're extremely efficient in identifying protection measures. The entire coastline cannot be walled. So we will lose some areas of development. We should be planning now, for example, as to how we might accommodate relocation near where that development might be lost to future flooding. New York City has begun to do that as a result of Sandy. So it's happening, the change, and good planning will help us be able to adapt to that.
And coordination with in your report is going to be important going forward. I do want to move to the nuts and bolts for zoning reclassification, but Graham, you had a quick point.
Thank you. I find it very encouraging, and I'm grateful to be here. Very encouraging to hear people with so many ideas and expertise and committed to the idea of planning. Very encouraging to me. And everything that we're talking about so far, from pumping wastewater to construction to building and so on, is going to involve a lot of use of energy. And I think it would be a very practical idea to have the town's energy committee involved in the planning. I'm not a member of that committee. I haven't spoken about this with anybody on that committee, so I don't know what the committee members would feel, but I think it would be a great idea, a very helpful idea to have the energy committee be part of this.
I think that's a very good suggestion. Let's move, if we would, to this recodification and the nuts and bolts of how some guidelines are going to be coordinated so that we move forward and organize.
The recodification of the zoning bylaw is not a rewrite of the zoning bylaw. It's essentially moving and clarifying some of the bylaw, reordering and reorganizing and renumbering them. But because of the layers of changes since 1925 and the fragmentation of the bylaw, this has become a much more complex job than it would sound like. The town's fortunate to have Bob Mitchell, FAICP, Bob Ritchie Esquire, and my predecessor, Brian Curry, a 28-year veteran of the bylaw, working on this project. We have a preeminent team at an excellent price. In particular, the work includes reorganizing the definition sections, uses and district sections, and non-conformity sections. The scope's been revised and extended since it was initially started in August 2016. We hope to bring the recodification to the April town meeting, but that's been pushed back to November 2019. In November 2019, there will be 2 articles envisioned, at least 2. One, the renumbering of the bylaw and recodification. The second would be removing parts of the bylaw that are no longer applicable. Any change, any deletions in the bylaw require a vote at town meeting and a review afterwards by the Attorney General. At our last joint meeting with the Planning Board and the ZBA, a scintillating 2-hour televised discussion of what those watching might have considered commas and semicolons. At the suggestion of our consultant, Bob Mitchell, he suggested that some of this work is typically done by a committee and not by a called meeting of 2 regulatory boards, as has been our practice here. So in consultation with Town Council Frank Duffy, Mr. Duffy will be convening a working group with 2 members of the Planning Board, a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Town Planner, our Zoning Administrator, the Building Commissioner, Associate Town Council, and that working group will convene in February to bring this work to the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals for some of those policy decisions. Hearings would begin in early fall and late summer to bring an article or articles to town meeting to complete the recodification of the zoning bylaw, resulting in a more organized and easier to use zoning bylaw. On On a second track, we have recently applied for ELTA grants through Cape Cod Commission to bring a computerized zoning portal to the town. That would allow someone who wants to, say they want to, I'd like to open a restaurant, you go to this portal, it's in use right now in Mashpee and Barnstable. You go to the portal and say, I'd like to open a restaurant. The program is tied to your GIS mapping in your zoning bylaw. It shows you those areas that you can do that and what those requirements of the zoning are. That will be a much easier thing to do after the recodification of the bylaw. So in November, we expect to see the recodification. Some second articles deleting things that aren't necessarily needed to be in the bylaw because of changes in law. Various moratoriums in there that don't actually apply anymore. And bringing this zoning portal in to kind of create just a much more easy to navigate landscape for zoning and the folks who want to use it essentially in business and residential communities.
That's going to be a number in terms of media time going forward. I know that part of the EDIC's strategic planning kind of looking widely at opportunities and taking advantage of the scientific organizations that we have, all around us, the blue economy of, Cape Cod in general. And Chris, I don't know if you want to kind of just give a summary of the EDIC is really on the most forward-thinking path here, and I just wondered as we segue to the next agenda item, which is improving coordination of community development related functions. I just wanted to get you and maybe Patty to comment on that.
Yeah, the EDIC, I think in December we had our update to our plan of what we wanted to do in the next couple of years, rather than just kind of plod along with our meetings. Was the idea was let's see what we could plan out and think about actually actively doing to help businesses come to Falmouth or grow in Falmouth, etc. So one of the goals that came out of it that became clear is we needed to help figure out what were the options. And I think
finance partners for that project to be facilitated, but I know that other folks have said Open Cape and similar technology is going to be important to draw people over the bridge.
Yeah, I think we're working with the, Brooks is leading that quite a bit, but working with the chamber and then all the local businesses on doing that, and I think that will be good.
So in terms of looking at community development, I think Tom has really introduced a very key point, not only coordinating the regulations that we have currently so that expectations can be lined up, but then getting that information out there through the portal. So that's going to save time for staff, it's going to save time for folks looking to interact with staff. Doug, please.
I want to ask a quick question about the zoning recodification. So with the introduction of the form-based code, I'm going to guess that we're going to need a whole section delineating the form-based code, and then in those areas, they would be exempt from standard zoning, I would guess. Is that correct?
Well, typically form-based code is a district. You're not going to do form-based code over the entire town. So you're going to pick those areas. So in that area, you would have this, for lack of a better name, the form-based code district. So the form-based code district would be the prevailing zoning regulations for that area. The existing zoning that as it exists and as we keep moving it will apply to other areas as well.
So will that be its own section within our? Okay, thank you.
I've got a question. What is the EDIC independent mode? It's not a you're looking to make it much easier to entice new businesses here, to help other businesses. Well, so far when somebody comes to do things, they come into town hall. How are they going to know about the function that you're anticipating building and serving? There's sort of a disconnect here because you reside in a different building, and I'm having trouble here because people are already having trouble when they hit town hall. Where do I go? Well, I'm sent there, and then I'm sent there, and yonder. How is this going to be coordinated with the town hall efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are independent nonprofit, but appointed by the town supervisor. Yeah, so we're sort of independent but yet integrated. And I think in that way, I think once we create sort of the position, I think that will be part of them working with the town. We work with pretty intimately. So I think, and then we have our own website, and so how we build that up so that people know will be part of the challenge of that person's job.
And you're talking about profiles. So one of the things, I'm a Board of Selectmen member of the EDIC. I serve as vice chair. So profile is important. And the EDIC has been advancing that over the last couple of years, putting signs on its land developments, the industrial parks, putting signs on the solar development that it's developed in which is, from which money is flowing to the town, and from which a second area of development will be coming. And that's one of the ways that we coordinate with the town manager's office in terms of electrical capacity. How is that going to benefit? And another thing is the bus station. I know Paul was integral in kicking off that project, and right. That's something that we're continuing to work on. We've integrated it with the Main Street Walk in terms of cafe entertainment. So these are isolated projects that benefit Falmouth's economy. And what the strategic plan for EDIC said this year is just echoing what Chris said. We need to bump it up a notch. We need to bump that ability to help. So we've got funding for Open Cape because that was the demand of Main Street. We're bumping up the opportunity, and that was one of the reasons that EDIC wanted to come to this Davis to form-based zoning meeting, so that the integration could be anticipated in terms of supporting development, where planning is looking to support development. So it's about plugging in where, because it is, sort of an arm of the town, not within the town, but so that arm can have a helping hand. So it's a very good question, and it's another part of this meeting. Sam.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've been involved in the sort of the revolution of technology in my career over the last 50 plus years. And I'm a little concerned that if we only look at single point business development, we're not looking at how much the internet has allowed people to have home-based businesses, and how really the location has become much more dispersed throughout our communities. And yet, that critical communication piece is weak here in Falmouth. And I just want to see us start advocating not for just the downtown of Main Street having high, having broadband communication capability, but for extending that out to the rest of the town. So it's not just the schools, not just the town, not just the academic institutions in Woods Hole, but more people have access to it. And I just A
So
young
you
couple
want-
just bought a piece of property in my community. They're both consultants, and they're gonna be relying on high-speed internet to be able to run their business out of their home.
Are
And
you
it doesn't
saying-
require big infrastructure change, which to me makes it a very attractive way of growing our community, the economic vitality of our
So
community.
Sam, do you want municipal broadband? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's one type of, there's also the commercial, like Fios is mentioned, that's a Verizon product. I'm talking about broadband access in general, and looking at, as we develop our infrastructure, like this, replacing the water main along the entire length of Main Street on out into East Falmouth, that we think about looking at it as a municipality would. Let's provide a conduit so that we can lease out space to whomever. Let's put us in the control of expanding access to high-speed internet services.
Who is the we? Who's doing this? That was my question.
Well, I've asked the town manager to look at it,
So
because I
that would be
think,
municipal.
yes, think of it as municipal, because that's the way cities work. They bury huge conduits in the streets so that they can lease out that space to telephone and electric. They have to have separate conduits, obviously, but the municipalities take up control over providing the utilities that a particular community needs. And I think we have to look at it that way. We can't rely on private business who is driven by profits and looking at us as a low-profit region to decide when they might come in here and provide that kind of capability. And that limits our ability to host, these home-based businesses, which don't require big buildings. It's much more dispersed and less of an impact on the quality of life that we have here and enjoy.
And add on to what Sam is saying, we have to look at it as a town. Well, in this case, it's a past infrastructure that we haven't taken advantage of, but it is a form of infrastructure. We have to look ahead 20, 30 years at what do we envision as a new form of infrastructure that should be provided.
21st century.
So Jim, is this something that the Route 28 committee would be looking into?
We discussed it, and they're probably going to make a recommendation that, well, we have this road totally torn up, but if we're going to ever do this, this would be the time to put the infrastructure in place, we can build on, not have to revisit it. So.
Thank you, Courtney.
Sam and I have commiserated over this issue of bringing high-speed broadband to the community. And so far, the feeling I have is that there doesn't seem to be much sense of urgency about this. And it's unfortunate because high-speed broadband is an infrastructure element that's critical to the future of this town. This town relies on tourism, servicing old people like myself. We need to broaden that. And there are plenty of models out there. There are towns in Massachusetts and in the country that have invested, created their own local broadband companies. Or they're a part of the town, just the same as the water and sewer division. And they provide, and they build the infrastructure. They maybe float the bond issues, but then ultimately the people who use the service pay for it. And I'm looking around this table. You guys are the movers and shakers in this town. And we need you people to get up and do something about this. I just don't understand what is the issue with creating, for example, a municipal-owned internet service. I don't understand what the problem is. People can think of lots of reasons why you can't do something. But nothing ever got done in the world by people saying, we can't do it. Lots of things can get done if we have the willpower. And a friend of mine recently came back from New Delhi.
and you were staying in the home of a person in New Delhi. They had 1,000 megabit internet service. There are many countries in this world, many of which we consider third world, that have far better broadband service than the town of Falmouth. And yet, we have these institutions here, the Oceanographic, NOAA, so forth, lots of spin-offs from that. And where is the desire to get this thing done? Nothing.
Doug.
I attended a meeting recently with the proprietor of the Open Cape network, and we are working on it. We did just put in $80,000 to complete the connection on Main Street, which is essential to expanding to Woods Hole. It is happening. It's just not happening fast enough. And they're this close to being ready to offer residential service. They actually had a development in Barnstable that they had an almost signed agreement, and then Comcast came in and underbid them by half price in order to keep them down and keep them from being able to start their initial pilot project for residential service. There's a group of people in Woods Hole that are mobilizing, and we'll organize that meeting at the Officer Lighthouse. And they're interested in putting up the money to develop their densely populated neighborhood with Open Cape. And the Open Cape guy said, well, as soon as we get the Main Street connection completed, we'll be able to run the lines down to Woods Hole, and then we can offer this service. So what really needs to happen now is neighborhoods need to mobilize and get organized, consider their density and whether or not they're really a good candidate for a pilot project. I mean, we're really not very far away from it.
So two points on that. If a neighborhood is interested in the pilot project that Doug's talking about, you can go on the Open Cape website, and it takes about a minute, because I've had my entire neighborhood do it, to fill out the interest survey. What are you interested in doing that? And then they do look, as Doug just said, at the density to see what the cost might be to go forward. But that's really option one. Option two that Sam kicked off and that Courtney is pushing is, as a municipality, is it something that we want to look into? Do we want, just like we run a golf course, or that some municipalities run, electrical light service, do we want to run a broadband Open Cape type of service? So I think that this has been something that's been a long time topic of discussion. The EDIC has been working on it for years. We've been there's fast internet in the library, in the town hall, in the scientific organizations. We're just not bringing it to the people. And I think as in terms of plugging the sustainability element and economic development in, we do have to accommodate these folks who come here. I certainly am one of many, many people in the room that work from home frequently. So as a Board of Selectmen member, we will bring this as an agenda topic before the Board of Selectmen, the concept of municipal broadband. It's going to be, as a result of this meeting, I will put it on an upcoming agenda. We're going to need some time to look into it. We'll look at other communities. EDIC has some of this research already. If you have thoughts, ideas, other places that are successful, and there are many, and there certainly can be grants, state money that is looked at, please send that information to the Board of Selectmen, and you will see that on an upcoming agenda. Please go ahead.
I'm not an expert on this fighting, but there's at least two things that whoever is looking into this should look into. One is the coming 5G wireless network that's national, way above the level of Falmouth, but it's just money. It's going to be easier eventually, and way faster than current Comcast. Second, my neighbor gets very high-speed internet just by paying a little bit more money to Comcast. This isn't low-income housing. I don't want to subsidize other rich engineers.
That definitely should be part of the conversation. Absolutely right. Anyone else before we move forward? Okay, the next topic, we want to look at, we've
Sue,
had a
Vicky
lot
had
of.
a comment.
Oh, sorry, did I miss someone? Oh, sorry, Vicky.
I'm just sitting here in the audience, but when we're discussing the executive director for the EDIC and the role they can play, and then town, although I was very much in favor of it, they didn't support having a community development position or whatever we're going to call the long-term planning person. We have a new planner and he seems to have a long-term outlook, but I know there's limits, this is an authority, but it doesn't make sense to me to have all this planning going on in just EDIC when the whole town can use it, and so as much as you can integrate that as possible would be ideal. We don't want to have another tower, have enough towers. We want to have some, EDIC has sources of funding that is independent of us voting things at town meetings. So, but we have this, we're just pointing out all the needs for long-term planning, and it just seems to be adding another position that's into long-term planning, but it's very focused only on EDIC, I think would be too bad. So as much within the legal limits of the creation of the authority and its independence, as much integration as there can be would be best.
Point well taken.
So do you want me to just comment
Please.
on that,
Yep.
if I may? Touching on what Vicki just noted, as I think most folks in this room are aware, and I think most, if not all, are supportive, the concept of the community development, collaboration, and centralization remains on the strategic goal of the Falmouth Board of Selectmen, has been for the past 3 or 5 years. We have attempted to do, as Vicki's noted, some reorganization administratively to bring in an additional staff position, community development director, to really integrate all of these approaches. And twice town meeting has declined to support the creation of that position. And that's our circumstance. And given that, and me as town manager working with the Board of Selectmen, we have moved forward to bring in staff positions involved in community development areas, the permitting, et cetera, much of what we're talking about, with people who are forward-thinking and collaborative and understand how to work as a team. And many of those people are with us this morning. Noreen Stockman, our recently appointed ZBA administrator, Tom Bott, relatively new town planner, although Tom's has significantly more months than Noreen, who just joined us officially full-time this month. Welcome. We have our building commissioner, Rod Palmer, and our assistant zoning administrator, inspector, Ollie as well. And Jen McKay is part of the process. Jen wasn't able to be here, our conservation administrator. And of course, Scott McGann, our health agent. These are incredibly well-qualified people who are working together collaboratively and do that on a day-to-day basis. But that is as far as we're able to go in terms of the determination made by town meeting to decline to support this new integral position. So we work on a collaborative basis and following the guidance that the Board of Selectmen have noted, and we rely heavily on our staff colleagues to get the job done. And one other comment, we have had for multiple years an internal development staff working group that my colleague Peter Johnson-Staub, as Assistant Town Manager, convenes, where we talk about integrating and collaborating on work internally with all the important work that we do here to facilitate things. But we are well aware of the need for further integration, and sadly the approach we had taken we weren't able to bring to closure, but we continue to make efforts to work collaboratively, and thankfully we have highly qualified professionals that work collaboratively every day, and we continue to push the margins of that. So I wanted to note that as well for the record.
And it really is appreciated, because that's part of what this meeting is about. Sam will be next, but I do want to move this sort of a segue. None of this happens without money, right? And so we have to continuously look at what we're doing right, what we could do better. So many people thought the last town meeting was very ineffective in a lot of ways. And in fact, we've had some contributors, long-term watchers and participants of town meeting, that have come to suggest that we look at petitioners' articles and try to help those folks, be more efficient and successful, and to consider whether the ideas that come from petitioners' articles might already be in the works with committees that Assistant Town Manager Peter Johnson-Staub is leading, or other ways. So I do want to move to that, but Sam, did you want to make a comment on this?
Just a quick clarification. Steve, you brought up the 5G. I think it's important. I just was at the Massachusetts Municipal Association's annual meeting, and there was actually a section on 5G put on by one of the state departments. It's important to recognize that the 5G modems have to be located about 100 yards apart. They don't talk to each other. They're linked by fiber optics, as are all of our current cell towers. We no longer use microwave links because every time you have a hurricane and a huge amount of rain, they go down. So all of our cell towers are linked together by fiber optic cable. When I'm talking about putting a conduit in, it's just like creating a zoning bylaw. I'm opening up the opportunity for private developers to come in and lease capacity from us, and do it in a way that's under the street, not going from pole to pole, which is the way the current fiber optic runs. And so, and the other thing is the bandwidth. You have to have fiber optics in order to have adequate bandwidth, and 5G allows people to have video on their cell phones. And that's an enormous amount of data transfer. So it only works when you have fiber optic connecting those boxes, which are located about 100 yards apart. They have to be above ground. We consider them to be a Wi-Fi modem. But the capacity has got to be there in terms of fiber optic link. And the question is, how do you want to provide that as a municipality? So I think that's the way we kind of have to look at this technology rollout. How do we want to control it? How do we want to make it inviting to not necessarily a municipal service, but even a commercial service that's available to the citizens and provides the kind of economic development and sustainability incentives for the future.
And there will be a further conversation. I do want to kind of move to the next topic. Peter Johnson-Staub put a couple of slides together based upon information that we've received from, many different subjects. Pardon? Concerned citizens. Thank you. So we don't have Jessica reading, unfortunately. She did a really nice job. But, this is just some, again, things that we've heard. There were too many amendments as printed, so it got kind of confusing. There wasn't enough, no matter how many times we're all out there explaining things and asking for comments. We have such a wide variety of citizens. Some are FCTV people. Some people, do come to precinct meetings. Other people look at the market and they want to see what's posted on the wall. So we have to continue to try to find better and wider ways to do our outreach. There were competing articles on the same topic, folks felt, and that's one of the things I think we can figure out a way in a process with staff, and I know the town manager and assistant town manager have been thinking about this since the last town meeting, about how we can, without stifling creative ideas, make them more productive and more efficient for town meeting members who attend. Some suggestions. Don't bring town-sponsored articles if substantial amendments are required. That's just, I think, really giving people an opportunity to do that advanced homework and giving more information availability earlier on. Post and distribute suggested guidelines for petition articles. I think that's something maybe we can put a handbook together when anybody comes and says that they want to submit a petitioner's article. It would be something where we can lend some guidance at the beginning. If there are business or stakeholder groups, we can suggest to the petitioner to go and do some outreach in advance. And then lastly, so that there aren't so many amendments on the floor that really confuse some folks, that we can ask town council to kind of give the petitioners some suggestions on the legal way to advance the ideas. Do we have the letter from folks? I just want to kind of...
I don't have that in slide form.
All right, so I know that... oh, okay, good. So, I don't know, why don't you go for it, just some segue on that one.
I'd like to the planning board, advance notice of public hearing for petitioners' articles may be inadequate. Public hearing on a petition article should not be open and closed on the same night. I think that's a good point. There should be a second meeting or at least a 1 week delay before closing the hearing on petition articles. That's a good one because when they first see it, the discussion is over. So if you give them, this all forces them to be more prepared. Basically, it's not in here, but I think we should eliminate the placeholder idea, because a placeholder, you know you're just going to be scrambling and rushing and it's going to be a mess. So number 2, prior to town meeting, planning board should consider holding a zoning night for general discussion of all zoning articles to help educate town meeting members outside the legal hearing process. The legal hearing does not allow for real debate. Precinct meetings are also a problematic forum for discussion of zoning articles. Even with joint precinct meetings, the meetings are spread out over many nights, making it difficult for the planning board to cover each meeting adequately. Another reason for needing a zoning night is that the planning board often makes amendments to its own articles after the public hearings without further public discussion. If FCTV could cut to tape the zoning night and rebroadcast it, town meeting members would have several more opportunities to get better informed. Number 3 is on town meeting floor. If the planning board articles involve new or complicated initiatives, such as the solar issue this fall, there would be a zoning preview message by the planning board to put the articles in context. The 4th suggestion is if a planning board article needs extensive amendments, say more than 2, the planning board should withdraw the article and present it at a subsequent town meeting. And then there's more comments regarding town meeting rules and procedures by this group. And number 1 is there needs to be adequate opportunity for town meeting members to speak on both and against any any article. When a question is called very clearly in the discussion, there's no debate on that motion, but the moderator should have the discretion to ask town meeting if there is any opposition to the article. If there is, in fairness, the opposition should be given time to speak before town meeting acts on the motion to call the question. Extensive amendments to any article is number 2 for that bullet point. Extensive amendments to any article, including complicated new main motion, should not be entertained. The article should be withdrawn and presented at the following town meeting. No one can cast an informed vote on something they're seeing for the first time. Under current rules, the moderator does not allow more than 2 amendments, but allowing a new main motion has become a way around that rule. So thank you for your consideration. Do you want to know who this is from? Susan is in the back. Susan Shepard is one person. Vicki Lowell also is here. Mary Pat Berry, Precinct 2, Judy Fenwick, and Virginia Valio. Not in order.
One of the reasons I wanted to ask for input from this group is that if we don't have the confidence of the town meeting members and very close thereafter the voters, none of this happens. If we look messy, if we look like, we don't strongly believe and have really good grounds for moving initiatives, then all of this hard work kind of gets lost in the night. So it's sort of, I deal with it all of the time and, always not entirely successfully, of course, but if I'm paid as a lawyer to forward an initiative, that's the client's goal. That's the reason I'm being paid. And you really have to look at the result here. So we all work so hard. We all, we're here now. We're putting a tremendous amount of effort. We think about it at, in the middle of the night. We wake up. We think about these ideas and put so much into it, whether you're staff, whether you're management, whether you're a volunteer. And I really want to do everything possible and kind of ask for help so that we're sure that all of this hard work gets properly implemented. And so that was the thought of the Board of Selectmen putting this forward, because that's our job as policymakers to make sure these policies, are successful. So I just wanted to put that out here. I know we've had input. Tom?
Yes, as we've talked at the planning board, I'm culpable in a lot of that confusion about zoning articles because of my unfamiliarity with the process, particularly the practice of setting the warrant 10 days after the warrant closes. So in order to try to improve communication, what we have done is get busy early on town-sponsored zoning articles. So we have had hearings on zoning articles prior to the warrant being closed, and those are in final form. Many of you who are town meeting members have received 2 emails already. And what the process is in discussion with the planning board is we are going to invite town meeting members to the hearing. So you get an email that says, here are the things the town is looking at. Here's the date of the hearing. We invite you to come. That first email said, and with the close of the hearings, we may also have some petition articles. So hence the second email that arrived in your inbox this week saying, here are the petition articles. The hearing for that will be on February 26th.
So I saw that, and I think one of the great things about this meeting is to tell precinct members to look for those, that's the reason for those invitations, and really take advantage of that opportunity. That's a brilliant idea.
So that third email that you'll be receiving will be after the hearings are closed. In the event that town meeting members aren't able to accept our invitation to come to the hearings, you'll get a third email with a link to FCTV's recording. In that email will be each planning article, what the article is, and when it's on the tape. So from the comfort of your own home, you can rewatch the debate with the planning board. You can see what the discussion was, what went forward, and what happened. So before you get to town meeting, you will see the petition articles, you will see the town-sponsored articles, you will have an invitation to the meetings, you will have a recap that you can watch in the comfort of your home. And you don't have to watch 3 hours of the meeting. You can go, I'm really just concerned about setbacks. So I'm going to go 2 minutes, 48 seconds on the tape, watch for 10 minutes, understand what's going on. This is how we want to present this information to town meetings and make sure they have it in their hands well in advance. I said I'm largely culpable for this, but one of the issues that I see is this setting the warrant 10 days after the closing of the articles of the warrant makes it practically impossible to have a hearing. Because if you have a hearing and you don't change anything, you either have written a perfect article, which is unlikely, or it's window dressing for what you're going to do. So I really think there has to be a sufficient amount of time to vet those sort of things, to have that conversation prior to. So Massachusetts general law says you set the warrant at least 7 days before the hearing. We can certainly do it a month before, but setting the warrant, frankly, right after the closing makes it very difficult to have that hearing process for those zoning articles and really have an informed discussion about it. So we're pushing information out to folks, making it as easy and painless as you can to talk about zoning. It's not as exciting as wastewater, mind you, but we are also immersed in zoning. And so we're happy to take your suggestions about how we can improve that process. But we're trying to push that information out to folks early in the process.
Doug and then Charlotte.
I just want to ask the town manager, is there a way that we can adjust the timeline so that we're not always in such a rush as we head into town meeting? It does seem like everything has to fall into place perfectly.
Well, there is some limited latitude for adjustment, but given the way the schedule works, and we have an April town meeting, and that we involve the finance committee and many others in it, if the selectmen don't close the warrant timely, then we can't make the deadlines to get the advertising out, to get the books prepared, to get the finance committee's involvement, and ultimately meet the schedule that's set. So it is, the most latitude we've had is to move 1 week in one direction or another, unless we abandon the April town meeting and go with one later in the year, which I've had at other communities I've been in, but I know that traditionally, ours is in April and November.
The other way to do it would be to close it December 15th or so, which would be only 3 weeks after we just had a town meeting.
True.
Yeah. Right.
And yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to leave it at that. Maybe we can consider that.
Charlotte.
I just want to add to what Tom said. It's appropriate that the planning board be taken to task for the last town meeting. We were all embarrassed by it, and we spent some time discussing it, of course. And among the other things that we decided to do is try to make the language a great deal clearer, so that the labels that are on the warrant articles, the explanations that go along with them, make them less bureaucratic and clearer so that people actually understand the context, to try to assure that within the warrant, everything that deals with a particular issue is in the same section of the warrant. You're not paging all the way through to find the bits and pieces and trying to figure out what conspiracy did it that way. But it's just how it's communicated would make an enormous difference. The language, the organization, and a lot of ways the typeface. So that you'll see in the emails that you've been receiving now from Tom's office, there's a red and blue, so that you can get what's completely new, what's been deleted. So a lot of effort is going in that direction. We would love to get a copy of that letter from thoughtful people. If we didn't already, there are a lot of good suggestions there.
Well, it's always dangerous to disagree with Charlotte because she's so incredibly smart and right almost all the time. But my only disagreement is, this is something that we all share, and we can, I certainly think, I appreciate planning, honing its process, and but the Board of Selectmen really feels the same way, just in terms of wanting to just be sure that, if there's another better way, we're in it together, we're better together, we're all responsible, and I just, it's shown by showing up here, very much appreciated. Is there anyone else who has a town meeting related suggestion? Let's just go around the table and then up to the back. Anyone?
Okay. A lot of the problem that you're seeing here with town meeting and the warrant articles is, my understanding, and I could be very wrong on this, is that a hearing is held after the publication of the warrant. And that becomes an official legal sort of meeting that you hear. If anything comes out of the hearing, then we're forced to put a change in on town meeting floor. What we've begun doing, but you can't call it a hearing, yet how do you not call it a hearing and get people to participate, is to have meetings before the warrant so that we can make any germane changes before it ever goes to the warrant. That's a way months-long process. And so we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place by having to have a hearing after the warrant closes and yet be expected not to make any changes for town meeting.
Let's have town council look at that. Pam?
Don't anybody throw anything at me, but I came from a town where we had open town meeting. And when I moved here, and I saw that back in, 1936, when you had a handful of people here, you went to representative town meeting because some issue arose and people were out of control about it. So the easiest thing to do was shut it down to the town and go to representative town meeting. And it's very disenfranchising to feel that you live in a town, you're involved in a town, but you can't vote. And I don't know whether there's any interest, but as a citizen, I want to be able to vote at town meeting. And when I look down the list of how many years people have been in those positions, and the family members that are all in the same position of town meeting members, it's a little appalling to me. And no one ever reaches out other than right before town meeting, there's a precinct meeting. But I've reached out to town meeting members, and sometimes I hear back, sometimes I don't. I think there are too many of them. And I think it would be really interesting for the town to see what would happen for one town meeting, to have it open to the community and see what kind of input you get. Because I fervently believe, and there are a lot of people that have moved here from other communities, as you well know, where there are open town meetings. And it just feels very cut off to me. I understand a city, a huge town like Brookline, or like Framingham, where, Julian, do they have open town meetings?
Yeah, not anymore.
Oh, because they became a city.
Yes, but they were representative, actually.
Yeah, well, it's huge. It's the largest city in the Commonwealth. But anyway, I just sometimes need to express my frustration to people other than just Sue.
Well, I wonder if we can if that will come within the charter review process, or that if that could be coordinated, if there's a way to look at that, maybe we should just put it on the table to see what folks feel. I know that Jim's been trying to get us in one for a while. He may feel the same, but thoughts on that?
Well, I think the change from a representative to an open town meeting would be a fundamental change in the charter that I believe is outside the purview of the current charter review process. That would require a different process. The town council has talked about a formal commission being paneled to do that. So I think that's a discussion for a different form and a different day.
So maybe that's something we could also put on the Board of Selectmen's agenda, just in terms of the topic of conversation. Eric, did you have a thought?
Yeah, that's sort of a big picture idea, which I frankly don't see much merit in. We have trouble getting people to run for town meeting now in many precincts, and the idea that there's hundreds of people out there clamoring to be at a voting town meeting if we don't let them do it, I don't think that's the case. With all due respect, there's a couple of sort of smaller things we could do. One is, in the past, the selectmen would put petitioners articles at the end of the warrant. It might be a practice to resume. At least the petitioners articles that appear to be the exact same ones that we just took up at the last town meeting. With all due respect to my friend here, we're going to see the same article from him that we saw at the last town meeting and voted down.
Actually, you won't.
The selectmen they can order the warrant the way they want to, and putting articles that have been thoroughly discussed before at the end might be a good idea. The other thing that we really, and I'm sorry the moderator isn't here, over the past couple of years, I've noticed more and more the moderator allowing people to speak who have spoken many times on many topics already. And he seems to think that he ought to keep recognizing them, and I think it drives the rest of the meeting bonkers, because we don't have 3 days if we can avoid being there for 3 days, and we could if every time somebody wanted to speak again, they didn't get recognized.
Thank you. Leonard, I saw you a while ago, and then John.
Okay, I just like to second what Eric just said. I would hope that at town meeting, there are a number of people who speak more than once at the same article. I can understand why the proponents and maybe the head of the opposition would be able to speak multiple times and answer the questions. But otherwise, I would hope that we would consider at least restricting the amount that people who are not proponents or direct head of the opposition can speak. You speak once on an article and that's it. If you have to figure out where you're supposed to speak, fine. That'll help define your point. My second issue is related to, I have a feeling, and this probably is just me, that on several occasions at town meeting, I say to myself, gee, I wish that person had gone to a precinct meeting and asked the question there. And I think we're underutilizing the precinct meetings. I know the practices vary from precinct to precinct, but at least in our precinct, people go to get answers to questions. And I think we could avoid some of those technical questions that should have been asked at precinct meeting that come up at town meeting. And my suggestion is that we take attendance at precinct meetings and we publish that in the enterprise just like we publish the attendance at the town meeting itself.
Good thought. Next, John, and then
Regarding our planning board zoning articles, it would be nice if some town meeting members would actually come to the hearing, to show up other than one person and maybe one attorney that has an interest, rather than wait to the end and then be confused. But it'd be nice to have some participation because it is important what we're doing.
absolutely. Ron?
I'm going to clarify. Eric doesn't know something about that, so that'll be clarified before.
Okay. Vicki? And then Susan.
My goal in being part of this is to try to make the planning board more successful. Because I think sometimes people don't vote for articles because they don't feel they understand them enough. So I think there are different things
maybe they don't like the idea of a zoning night because you can come to various hearings, but if you have a chance to sort of put the articles in context and explain them, I think it might be too long to just do it at a presentation like the committee reports we have at town meeting. But I think that could also be an element. I mean, often we have the budget message. We have the town manager sometimes give us a report. The school committee might give a report, the recreation committee. And I don't want to overburden the town meeting with reports, but I think the planning board, I think actually this year they did a lot of good things. There were confusing articles, but they were trying to outreach more. And I think in the past 2 decades, I've been a town meeting member probably too long. I should yield my seat, but they sort of fell back and not explaining things well enough. I think it's just if they can, and the issue of the timing, I think it's permissible for them to bring a slightly different article to town meeting if they've gone through these efforts to explain it before. They can't hand it to people the night before or the night of the town meeting and expect them to be receptive. And the other thing that I'm disappointed in is I calling the question. I think in the old days, it was really rare to call the question. And now there's certain times when everybody feels, yes, this is the time to do it, but I think it's happening too much.
It's a weapon.
Yeah, it's become, so that's advice to the moderator, not the selectmen don't control that, but I think one other particular is when a petitioner has an article, sometimes the planning board votes to support it, and it might not be a unanimous vote, but they owe it to town meeting to say why they voted to support it. They shouldn't just let the petitioner sink or fail. And if it's something they don't support, they shouldn't just let the petitioner sink or fail. They ought to articulate exactly why they don't recommend it. I think you can't over-explain zoning. Zoning's complicated. So they have to really, in this form-based zoning, they're going to have lots of meetings because what I feel is going to happen is the concept is going to just put on just that particular area that they're first thinking of, and then everybody's going to come out of the woodwork that, oh no, the traffic there, it's going to all focus on that and not the whole concept. I'm hoping if we get the concept out there, other landowners will come and say, well, I'd like this for my land, but it's going to be hard, and so I don't want to dump more work on the planning board, but I think all they can do to get out there and explain what the intent of trying to do and what specifically this will do, the more power to them, because it's as I say, zoning is very complicated, and you've got to get a 2/3 vote, and that's really hard. So if I can be helpful in that, I'd be happy to. I don't like speaking against town meeting or planning board articles, but once in a while I do.
Susan?
I want to say I really appreciate the efforts you've already taken. I read everything I get from the town, but I do like to read it in advance of the night of town meeting. And I would just like to say to the lady here, I have a lot of relatives and friends who live in Bourne. And I can't tell you, literally hundreds of times they have said, oh my God, you're so lucky to have representative town meeting. Because Bourne has a history of having to postpone meetings because they don't get enough people. They can't get a quorum unless there's a contentious article, and then they get 800 people. So I think there are actually a lot of arguments in favor of representative town meeting. I think it's a good thing.
I want to support what Vicki said about the planning board either making recommendations to the petitioner rather than suggesting postponing it, or even just taking a vote on it. If it's a 3-2, they can explain it. I would think that might go forward to the Board of Selectmen, and I think it's a policy that you vote indefinite postponement on many of the town meeting articles, and that might be appropriate shaking your head, so.
It's not a policy. We by charter, have to make a decision on every petitioner's article, either for or against, and then make recommendations to why make it for or against. It's not-
Okay, We've actually supported several recently.
Okay. A couple of other things on the location of the upcoming meeting. I think the joint meeting for all the zoning articles. You may want to consider a larger venue, maybe just see how this one goes, just to make sure you're not at overflow capacity. I guess I would a little bit disagree with Eric that having the selectmen locate petitioners' articles at the end of town meeting. Town meeting is pretty worn out, so I think that can be a political one way or the other. So Eric brings up some very good points, but I think that relegate petitioners' articles, or even if it's a second article, that might be more well-informed, or written, so that shouldn't necessarily get relegated to the end of the meeting. Another thing is more practical, is that online petition article. It's very difficult to type in when you go online to do a petition article. It's good that it's there, and it's very difficult to type in the space they give you in a normal manner. I tried flipping and pasting, and I couldn't do it. I make a lot of typographical errors, as people know. So you may want to have them look at the ease of, rather than line by line. You put it on WordPerfect, you hopefully get the typographical and spelling errors out, and then you paste it in. That cannot be done on the current IT platform for petitions article. And I guess I would concur, because this is the first year I thought about it, that the timing of when you have to have petitioners articles in, it's too early, January, and that goes to a bigger question. Christmas is just over with. You're rethinking. So I would think possibly postponing town meeting a little bit later to meet the deadlines that the town required could be important. And I would think pushing it backwards to December would be horrendous given the holidays and the vacations.
The reason we can't move the April town meeting later in the year is we need to have it a certain number of days before the town election to be able to put articles for bonding and for borrowing on the May one. So
that's it.
We can't do that
okay.
at all.
I just like the idea of moving it earlier.
But then it's exactly what Jerry said. It's right now too rushed to do.
Just to get it done before you start your shopping.
Thank you.
All right, Ken, please, and then we'll have one more comment because it's getting later, maybe two.
So I had 2 points I wanted to make. One, the zoning articles, I think one of the challenges always is the context. And often I don't think there's enough. They take a little tiny piece of the bylaw that's being modified and, show how that's changing. But people don't see the full context. What's permitted by right? What's permitted by special permit? You don't want to make the warrant booklet into something 5,000 pages long, but maybe we could email people the full sections that are pertinent to particular changes, and they could look those up as PDFs on their phones or whatever, so they could really get the context. I think expecting everyone to show up for either the hearings or zoning night or whatever, that's great. It would be good. More information is better, but you're always going to have conflicts and people aren't going to be able to. The second point I wanted to make, I completely agree with Eric. I don't know how we control it, but there's too many people getting up too many times on every article. And the only other thing that occurs to me is if we had some limit on length of debate for any article, at which time town meeting has to affirmatively vote for things debate, as opposed to asking for people to call the question.
So on process issues where the moderator is involved, if you could follow up with an email and writing to send to the Board of Selectmen, we'll be sure to organize those for consideration because they're good and they should should be part of this process. Are you good? I just have two more folks. Okay. Peter, please.
Okay. First of all, I think Tom Bott deserves another comment because he has taken the most constructive approach to resolving this issue that I've seen. And it's a continuing issue, but he's addressing the root cause. As a precinct captain and at our precinct meetings, we typically get half of the people showing up every time. And so trying to make them show up isn't going to work. But I bet a lot, at least for myself, I appreciate the emails, the highlighting of what's added, what's subtracted, and even the vignettes on the hearings where those particular things were discussed and resolved. And those are the inputs that people need in order to be educated and informed at town meeting. And I think sitting at home on their own time, kind of like going to school on your computer, is where they can educate themselves, but they need the opportunity. And Tom has given us that opportunity, and I hope you'll consider reapplying that to every other town department that submits articles where it's possible. Everyone isn't recorded on television and such, but I think it's a great model to think about. And on that, I would like to make my last suggestion, which is over the years, as I've seen petitioners submit articles, they're often passionate about a subject and they feel that they're in a minority position or that there are some powers or factions that oppose them and that they're not especially welcome. And so they don't utilize the resources at their disposal to craft a really comprehensive, legitimate article to present and to present their voice at town meeting. And so as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, it almost seemed to me like those in control of the process were trying to trip up people who were there to put forward an article that wasn't endorsed by one or another of the bodies who normally recommend indefinite postponement or for or against an article. I think if we take the other side and try to enable the voice of people who have something to say and they feel like they need to say it through an article at town meeting, then we would have a much better process. And I'll just take another minute to say, for instance, our town clerk is a wonderful resource and he can tell you all the stakeholders in a particular article. If we had a coach who would tell petitioners exactly who they should talk to, and if they were willing to follow that and first go to the meetings of the stakeholders, committees, and find out that there was no reception, maybe they would never get to the point of having to write an article, which isn't properly written, and the legal counsel would say, we can't consider that, or the moderator would say, oh, you left out a comma. I think if we try to enable people by first coaching them in how to go about dealing with their issue. I know we've lived here for 10 years, and frankly, until the last few years, I really haven't understood how everything works together in our town government, and it's confusing. So if there was something that would address the need for people to really do a good job of representing themselves and their ideas at town meeting, and I don't know what you call it, but a coach, and who could direct them. And that, as Mr. Suso said, every department manager I've talked to has been willing to give me time and collaborate and discuss the issues and go to the depth that I would need to understand it. The last thing, I don't know what to do about this because I understand Mr. Jones' comment about all the requirements for lead times, but for instance, several people came up to me and said, well, let's do an article on this or that for this town meeting. Well, it was a week before the warrant closed, and so there's not an awareness of the time scale and the time available to do a good job. So that could be part of the education. And so those are the 2 points I'd like to make. Thank you, Tom, and let's enable people who want to have a voice instead of trying to defeat them.
Thank you. I said that Judy Fenwick was going to be last because we're getting so late on time, but I want to... I can talk fast. Well, because I want to thank everyone again for coming here. You know, I think that I think Grant made a good suggestion. Energy should have been part of this conversation, or maybe part of the next. The way these joint meetings happen is it's squeezed into everything else, the whirlwind of all these deadlines that we're talking about. If there's something that any of you feel like should be a topic of conversation for this forum, send it to me, or whatever chair and is going forward in their process, because it's issue-based. And based upon those issues, we then invite folks who we think might be interested, might want to contribute. So going forward, you know, that is the process. It's very hard to do, takes a lot of staff time. It's literally probably 50 emails of me pushing, let's do it, let's get a date, and coordinating all of this. It's a ton considering everything else that's going on, but it's so important and it's so crucial that you're here and have contributed. Part of that, I want to just call attention as Judy is about to speak. Doug Brown and Judy have been working on coordinating these issues in a more documentary sense. What are, you know, for all committees to have an opportunity to update what their mission statements are, for committees to have an opportunity to make sure that there's a honed committee handbook so that you are, when you're invited on a committee or when you have interest in a committee, you know what the expectations are. That, you know, all of this work is so dependent upon foundation, and that's part of, you know, the stool that we all stand on. So, and mindful of the time, we are a bit long. Pat, if we have time, we can follow up, but I want to hear Judy's comment.
Madam Chair, I'm one of the signatories to that memorandum, and so delighted that we've got the audience today and the comments. I've been participating, starting about a month ago, with a local reviewers and voters study that is feeding into a state study about citizen-initiated ballot questions. And so this leads me to look with a finer lens at the petitioner article issue that's being discussed today. And I don't want to become the queen of handbooks, but I would strongly recommend that you follow the lead of a lot of other Massachusetts communities. They have a town meeting handbook. I just pulled up on the web, thanks to good, not wireless, but the town of Brookline has about a 45-page town meeting handbook, and 3 pages are devoted to preparing and processing a warrant article, citizen petition articles. So, I mean, I think that kind of thing, that kind of communicating, so that the sense that town meeting is not a club, it's a very vibrant organization, and how to learn about what it does from both the outside and the inside, because I think a lot of town meeting members could stand for an education, including myself. So I would strongly recommend that be a way that you help educate and enable and make the petitioner article a really good way to participate in town government. Thank you.
Appreciate that, and I like the fact that that's another way to let town meeting members know how important you are to the community. And, you know, if you give them the, you know, the requirements, expectations, whatever, of having that privilege, you know, I think that's another way that, you know, for the process to be more efficient. Last word?
This is just very quick. It started with the original Charter Commission, a suggestion for an ombudsman. And it has come up multiple times since then. It would be a person who is extremely knowledgeable about town hall, who would sit right there where the bulletin board is, big question mark, all kinds of capacity to hand out brochures, answer questions, or send you in the right direction if you don't know.
So we had a meeting with the Plymouth County not too long ago, and they were giddy over the fact that Falmouth has, they said, an ombudsman. When you walk in the door to town hall, there's a person that sits there and says, this is where you go for that, this is where you go for that. So I'm not sure if the job precisely lines up. I'm just making the point that, you know, we do have someone for the folks at home that will help you when you come to town hall, but you are raising it to another level, and that should be
I am
looked at.
raising it to another level. It is somebody who's extremely knowledgeable about town processes and
Absolutely.
departments.
Thank you all. Very grateful to have you here. Give yourselves an applause. They'll be incorporated.